In 2024, Oxford declared brain rot the word of the year. The Buddha diagnosed it 2,500 years ago. He had a single Pali word for it. And that word does not mean what you think. It does not mean carelessness. It does not mean laziness. It means you are drunk, intoxicated by distraction, and you do not know it. The last thing he ever said, the final sentence of a 45-year teaching career, spoken while dying in a grove of sal trees surrounded by 500 monks, was about this exact problem. And what he prescribed is something a neuroscientist at Harvard can now photograph working inside your skull. This is not a metaphor. This is not a self-help lecture about putting down your phone. This is a clinical diagnosis made by a man who understood the human mind the way an engineer understands a machine, and a prescription that took 25 centuries to verify. A prince. It starts with a wedding. A prince and a woman so beautiful that an entire kingdom was named after her face. In the 5th century before the Common Era, in the city of Kapilavastu, a prince named Nanda was about to be married. His fiancée was a woman called Janapada Kalyani, and the name itself tells you something. It translates roughly to the grace of the kingdom. She was considered so beautiful that the people named her after the land itself, as if she were not a person, but a landscape. The wedding pavilion was decorated. The musicians were ready. Next, Janapada Kalyani sat in her finest dress, waiting. And then the Buddha arrived, not as a guest. The Buddha was Nanda's half-brother. Same father, King Suddhodana, different mother. He walked into the palace, looked at Nanda, and handed him an alms bowl. Then he turned and walked out. Nanda followed. He planned to hand back the bowl and return to his bride. But the Buddha kept walking through the streets, past the city gate, all the way to the monastery. And Nanda, out of respect, out of obligation, out of something he could not quite name, followed. He never went back to the wedding. Janapada Kalyani waited at the pavilion. The musicians stopped playing. The flowers wilted. And at the monastery, Nanda fell apart. He could not meditate. He could not listen to teachings. He could not sleep. He drew pictures of her face on rocks. His mind was not in the monastery. His mind was still at the wedding, still looking at the woman he had left behind. Every thought circled back to her. Every silence filled with her image. You know this pattern. Not with a fiancé. Maybe. But with your phone. With the video you were watching before you opened this one. With the argument replaying in your head at 2 in the morning. Your mind locks onto something, and you cannot make it stop. The Buddha did not scold Nanda. He did not tell him to try harder. He did not say discipline yourself. He gave him a diagnosis. The Pali word is apamada. Every English translation says heedlessness, or carelessness, or negligence. But those translations hide what the word actually means. In Pali, apamada describes a specific state, a person who is blind drunk, not tipsy, not slightly distracted, intoxicated to the point of not knowing what they are doing, the kind of drunk where you wake up the next morning, and your friends have to tell you what you said because you have no memory of it. That is apamada. That is what the Buddha saw when he looked at Nanda sitting in the monastery drawing faces on rocks. Not a man who lacked willpower. A man who was drunk on something and did not know the glass was in his hand. And here is what changes everything. That same diagnosis Apamada, intoxication by distraction, is not something the Buddha applied to one lovesick prince. He applied it to the entire human condition. Why? In the Dhammapada, the oldest collection of his sayings, he said this: the heedless are as if already dead. Not dying, already dead. Walking, breathing, scrolling, and already gone. But the Buddha did not stop at naming the disease. He mapped exactly how it works. 5 specific ways your mind goes blind. And the metaphor he used is something you can test on yourself right now. He called them nivarana. Every translation says hindrances, but the Pali word means something more precise. Nivarana means curtains, things that fall over the mind and block you from seeing clearly. Your mind is not broken. It is covered. And there are exactly 5 curtains. He described them using a bowl of water. Take a bowl of clear water and add dye. Bright, beautiful color. You cannot see your reflection anymore. That is sensory desire, kamachanda. Your mind is so saturated with wanting. The next video, the next notification, the next bite, the next purchase, that you cannot see yourself clearly. The wanting itself becomes the blindness. Now take a fresh bowl and bring it to a boil. The surface churns, no reflection. That is ill will, vyapada. Anger. Resentment, the outrage cycle that social media feeds you for breakfast. Your mind is not wrong for feeling it, but a boiling mind cannot see straight. Third bowl. Let algae grow across the surface. Thick, green, still. That is sloth and torpor, thinamida, not laziness. Something heavier, the fog that settles after 3 hours of content you did not choose. Your body is awake, but your mind has checked out. Fourth bowl. Stir it with wind. Ripples everywhere. That is restlessness and worry. Uddhaka kukuka. The mind that cannot settle. Jumping from tab to tab, app to app, thought to thought. Not because any one thing is urgent, because stillness has become unbearable. Fifth bowl. Pour in mud. Cloudy, thick, impenetrable. That is doubt, visikiccha. Not healthy questioning, paralysis. The inability to trust your own judgment after you have consumed so many contradictory opinions that nothing feels reliable anymore. 5 bowls. 5 curtains. 5 ways the water becomes unreadable. And the Buddha's point was not that you should fight them. You cannot fight a curtain. You draw it back. You let the water settle. Every notification is a drop of dye. Every outrage cycle boils it. Every hour of passive scrolling lets the algae grow. And you, sitting in the middle of it, cannot see your own reflection. You have forgotten what clear water looks like. And here is what the Buddha could not have known, but somehow described perfectly. If what you have heard so far is changing how you think about the hours you spend on your phone, do something the Buddha would have approved of. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the number, because clicking that button is a small act of choosing. You saw the 5 bowls of water. You recognized yourself in at least one of them. And the decision to pay attention, even to something as small as a subscribe button, is the opposite of apamada. It is the beginning of what the Buddha called the cure. Because what happened in 1854, when an American writer sat alone in a cabin and used almost the exact same words the Buddha used, and what a neuroscientist at Harvard found inside the skulls of meditators. That is where this story goes next. In 1854, Henry David Thoreau was living alone in a cabin near Walden Pond in Massachusetts. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping America. Factories were replacing farms. Newspapers were multiplying. Information, for the first time in human history, was moving faster than a person could walk. And Thoreau looked at what it was doing to people's minds and wrote this: "Why level downward to our dullest perception always, and praise that as common sense?" Then he asked a question that sounds like it was written last week. While England endeavors to cure the potato rot, will not any endeavor to cure the brain rot, which prevails so much more widely and fatally? 1854. No smartphones, no social media, no algorithms. And a man sitting by a pond in Massachusetts saw the same disease the Buddha diagnosed 25 centuries earlier: the curtains falling over the mind, the water going cloudy, the slow, imperceptible loss of the ability to see clearly. Thoreau did not know the Pali word for it, but he described apamada, the intoxication of a mind that has stopped choosing where to look. And now, 170 years after Thoreau, 2,500 years after the Buddha, science can photograph the damage. In 2021, researchers reviewed brain scans in the journal Molecular Psychiatry of people classified as problematic internet users. They found significantly decreased gray matter in multiple brain regions compared to controls. Gray matter, the tissue that handles memory, emotional regulation, decision-making, impulse control, the thinking part of your brain, shrinking. A separate review in 2023, led by neuroscientist Christian Montag, analyzed 26 MRI-based studies of young people who use smartphones heavily. The pattern was consistent. Reduced gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex. That is the region directly behind your forehead. It handles planning, focus, and the ability to resist impulses. Think of it as the air traffic control tower for your mind. When it thins, the planes do not stop coming. They just start crashing into each other. And the attention span data tells the same story from a different angle. In 2004, the average time a person could focus on a single task was 2.5 minutes. Today, it is under 60 seconds. Not because you are weaker than your parents, because the environment you are swimming in is saturated with dye, boiling with outrage, covered in algae, whipped by wind, and thick with mud. The 5 bowls, all at once, all day. Remember the bowl of water? Every time you scroll without choosing to, without deciding, I want to see this, you are adding dye. Every time you engage with content designed to make you angry, you are boiling the water. Every hour you spend consuming things that ask nothing of your mind, the algae grows thicker. And the worst part is, you cannot see it happening because the person losing their reflection cannot see that they have lost it. That is the grief of this story. Brain rot is not a joke. It is not a Gen Z meme. It is a measurable neurological phenomenon that the Buddha diagnosed as apamada, and that Thoreau saw coming 170 years ago, and that your brain is experiencing right now as the gray matter behind your forehead gets thinner. But the Buddha did not just name the disease. He prescribed the cure. And in 2005, a psychologist at Harvard put that cure inside an MRI scanner. What she found should not have been possible. Her name is Sarah Lazar. She works at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. She took 20 people who practiced Buddhist-derived meditation. Not monks, not people living in monasteries, people with jobs and families who meditated about 40 minutes a day. And she compared their brain scans to 15 people who did not meditate. The meditators had thicker cortex, specifically in the prefrontal cortex, the air traffic control tower, and in the insula, the region responsible for body awareness and emotional processing, the exact regions that thin when you scroll passively. But here is the detail that should stop you. The thickness increase was more pronounced in older meditators. In a normal brain, the prefrontal cortex thins as you age. In meditators, it was holding steady, even thickening. As if the practice was not just preventing the damage, but reversing it. 6 years later, a neuroscientist named Britta Holzel ran the next experiment. She took 16 people who had never sat still with their own mind on purpose. She put them through an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program, a clinical adaptation of Buddhist sati, the attentional training the Buddha prescribed. 8 weeks, not 8 years, not a lifetime, 8 weeks. Then she scanned their brains again. Gray matter density in the left hippocampus, the region responsible for learning, memory, and emotional regulation, had measurably increased. In 8 weeks, the control group showed no change. The practice that produced these changes has a direct ancestor. It is derived from sati, the quality of bare, non-judgmental attention that the Buddha placed at the center of apamada. And apamada, the Pali word that means the opposite of intoxication, is not a philosophy. It is a practice, a specific thing you do with your mind, not trying harder, not forcing yourself to concentrate. The literal opposite of being drunk. Sobriety of attention, waking up to what is actually in front of you, instead of being pulled by what your mind craves next. The Buddha prescribed apamada. Science can now photograph what apamada does to the brain. It rebuilds exactly what pamada destroys. And when the Buddha was dying, 80 years old, in a grove of sal trees, surrounded by 500 monks, the last thing he chose to say with his final breath was about exactly this. He was 80 years old. His body had been failing for months. He had told Ananda, his cousin, his attendant, the man who had walked beside him for 25 years, that the time was coming. And Ananda had not been ready to hear it. The Buddha was on a final tour of the places where he had taught. One last visit to the communities he had built, the monks he had trained, the towns where people had come to him with their suffering and left carrying something lighter. At a place called Pava, he accepted a meal from a supporter, and it made him fatally ill. Food poisoning. The greatest mind in the ancient world brought down by a meal. He kept walking, sick, in pain, his body breaking down with every step. He made it to Kusinara, a small, unremarkable town, surrounded by sal trees. And there he lay down on his right side, between two of those trees, and he knew. Word went out. Monks began arriving from everywhere. 500 of them gathered in that grove to be near him one last time. And Ananda, the man who had memorized more of the Buddha's teachings than anyone alive, the man who could recite entire discourses from memory, the man who had been closer to the Buddha than any other human being on earth, went behind a building and wept. I am still a learner. I have not yet completed the path. And the teacher is about to pass away. The teacher who had such compassion for me. You can feel what that is. You have felt some version of it. The person who made the world makes sense. A parent, a teacher, a mentor. And the moment you realized they would not always be there to explain things. That vertigo, that sudden exposure. Ananda was the most devoted student in human history. And he was standing behind a building, unable to stop crying. The Buddha heard that Ananda was weeping. He sent for him. And what he said was not comfort. It was teaching. Do not grieve, Ananda. Have I not told you that all things dear and delightful are subject to change? How could it be that what is born, what is compounded, what is subject to decay, should not decay? That is impossible. Then the Buddha turned to the 500 monks gathered around him. He looked at them, and he asked a question that still echoes. Do any of you have doubts? About the teaching? About the path? About anything I have said in 45 years? Ask now. Do not later regret that you were in the presence of the teacher and did not ask. Silence. Not one voice. He asked again. 500 monks. Not one question. Then Ananda said, Venerable sir, not one of these monks has any doubt. Even the least accomplished among them has entered the stream, and the Buddha, lying on his right side, between two sal trees, with his body failing and his breath thinning, spoke his final words to the world. All conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with heedfulness. Apamadana sampadetha, his last word, not compassion, not enlightenment, not nirvana, not even meditation. Apamada, the opposite of intoxication, the opposite of pamada, the single quality he considered so important that it was the last thing he wanted the human species to hear from him. Strive on with heedfulness. Do not let the curtains fall. Do not let the water go cloudy. Do not. After everything you have learned, everything you have seen, everything you now know about how the mind deceives itself, do not go back to sleep. He had spent 45 years teaching compassion, concentration, wisdom, ethics, mindfulness, the nature of suffering, the path to its end. He had hundreds of teachings to choose from, and with his final breath, he chose this. Because without apamada, none of the rest works. Compassion without heedfulness becomes sentimentality. Meditation without heedfulness becomes daydreaming. Wisdom without heedfulness becomes trivia. You forget by tomorrow. Apamada is the foundation. It is the bowl of clear water. It does not filter out the dye. It does not cool the boiling. It does not scrape the algae, or calm the wind, or strain the mud. It lets the water go still, and when the water is still, truly still, the sediment settles on its own. You can see your reflection again. You can see yourself clearly. Not because you fought your way to clarity, because you stopped adding to the noise. The Buddha died shortly after those words. He moved through the jhanas, the deepening states of concentration he had practiced for 45 years. One last time, and then he was gone. But the word remained. Apamada. The last prescription written into every copy of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, recited by monks for 25 centuries, and now confirmed by a neuroscientist in a lab at Harvard who put the cure inside a scanner and watched the gray matter grow back. So, here is what you carry out of this video. First, the fact. Brain rot is not a meme. It is not a Gen Z joke. It is a measurable neurological phenomenon. Gray matter thinning in the prefrontal cortex from unchosen, passive consumption. And the Buddha diagnosed it 2,500 years before Oxford gave it a name. His word was apamada. It does not mean carelessness. It means intoxication. And he said the heedless are as if already dead. Second, the practice. The cure is apamada. Not discipline, not willpower, not quitting the internet and moving to a cabin. Apamada is the opposite choose of intoxication. It is the decision to choose your attention instead of letting it be chosen for you. Every time you notice that you are scrolling without having decided to scroll, and you pause, that is apamada. Every time you spend 30 seconds paying attention to your own breath instead of reaching for a notification, that is what Walden's meditators were doing inside the scanner when their gray matter started growing back. It does not require perfection. It requires noticing. The brain responds to practice, not to promises. Third, and this is the one I want you to sit with. You are not someone with a short attention span. You are not someone who lacks discipline. You are not someone who is too far gone for this to matter. You are someone who has been drinking without knowing the glass was in your hand. The curtains fell so slowly. You forgot there was a window behind them, and now you can see it. That moment, the moment you notice, is not a failure. It is the beginning of apamada. It is the moment you sober up, and a 2,500-year-old tradition and a brain scanner at Harvard are both telling you the same thing. That moment is enough to start. Here is what I want to know from you. When was the last time you noticed yourself scrolling and realized you could not remember picking up the phone? Tell me in the comments, not as a confession, as a first act of apamada, because noticing is the first step the Buddha prescribed. If this changed how you see your own attention, subscribe. The next video in this series goes deeper into one of the 5 curtains. The one the Buddha said is the most dangerous of all. The Buddha's last word was not goodbye. It was wake up.